Hello, welcome to Fundamentals of Chinese Spearwork. The way that this class is going to be is very different from the mechanics class I taught the other day if you were there. That was just a fire hose of a bunch of different ideas. This one is going to be 3 things that we will unpack with a very much amount of depth for however much time we spend on it, probably half an hour, probably not more than an hour if I'm going long like yesterday. So if you ever learn anything about Chinese martial art styles that practice spear, the first thing that you learn in spear, because this is such a fundamental movement to everything else they do in those styles, are 3 moves. Lan, Na, Ja. Right, which is translated roughly to intercepting, obstructing, and piercing, right? So that is Lan, Na, Ja. And so if you're seeing people drilling this, you will often see Chinese martial arts practitioners doing this repeated over and over very quickly. And that is the fundamental motion. That is the set of 3 moves that we're going to be breaking down for this class. So starting off, right, usually I wind up doing the sort of breakdown of mechanics and then talk about how that affects the dynamics when you're paired up with someone. I'm going to reverse that a little bit. Does someone want to volunteer with me? So I'm gonna, yeah, bring your spear, please. So I'm gonna just rely on you today instead of doing what we did the other day. So you'll just be my dedicated volunteer if you don't mind. Perfect. So starting off, looking at how does this look when we are squared up and against an opponent? The basic version is that if we are in a bind, I want to deflect rotationally. Right? So I can, for demonstration's sake, as one example, I can enter here and then rotationally move this spear out of the way so that I am online and Zell is not. So if Zell tries to stab from here, my spear is obstructing that move, right? So hence the term obstruction that is used as the Chinese name there. Thank you, that's all I need for now. Right, so how do we get that kind of mechanic? Right, so the idea here is that I want to be pressing into my opponent, right? So often you will see people doing kind of lateral motions with spear, right? So other than your piercing moves, how are we typically thinking about getting someone else's spear out of the way? Usually that's things like a beat, right? So I'm going to beat the side of someone's spear with a lateral move. This is more rotational, right? So you want to be thinking about that rotational kind of movement. So moving in that circle, but pressing as you are moving in that circle, right? So if I am pressing against my hand here, my hands are both pressing against each other as we're moving. Like so, right? So my hand is moving this way, but I'm still pressing down in this direction that my finger is pointing. The reason for that, actually, let me get you back up here, Zell. If we have our spears pressed together and we're just pressing into each other, this is a competition of whoever is strongest, and this is not a good position for either of us. But we can only be pressing into the same position, right? So if I am here and then I push down on her spear, that's not the same direction she's pushing. We can effectively only apply one vector of force at a time, right? So the idea here is that if we've got a vector of force here, then I want to be able to push it in a different direction, right? So that kind of gradual circle is how we get to that. if you have done other kinds of, this applies broadly, right? So this is the same move that you see in fencing. When you see fencers doing this kind of move, this is also something that you'll see for parries in boxing, right? So, and actually, let me have you demonstrate a jab for me real quick, right? So, spear down, jab with your hand, boxing style. Right, so if Zell does a jab at me, then I like to parry this way. Right, so I'll do that kind of rotational move so that that jab gets out of the way. That move that I'm doing with my hand is the same kind of circular motion that we're getting out of this spear move. The mechanics breakdown of this is that it comes down to hip engagement. I think I'm done with you for the moment. Thank you. Right, so hip engagement is I want to be turning my hips. That's what is driving the rotation here. Right, so you're typically in spear. This is not we will not find an exception to this here. Right, typically for whatever spear fighting you're doing, your main driver of manipulation is your rear hand and your lead hand is your guide hand, right? Same thing. So if we think about a pool cue shot, our lead hand is guiding and our rear hand is driving that motion. It is the same thing for when we are doing these rotations. Right, so this is just your pivot point, your fulcrum for doing that, and you're driving that rotation from your rear hand. But both of your hands are going to be doing some amount of rotating, right, like so. And these two rotational moves are effectively, if you haven't put this together, they are inverse of one another, right? So you can just go back and forth between these two positions. You're driving from your hips, so your hips are leading your kinetic chain here, hips into shoulder, shoulder is leading your elbow and wrist. So from this standard sort of guard position, if I'm doing my intercepting, then my hips are pulling this pommel upwards. And we want to make sure that we are doing that driving, right? Driving from the hips, activating that kinetic chain, because if you're just doing this with your arm, this is not going to be the best thing for your rotator cuff, especially if you're doing that pressing against someone else's spear. Right, so driving hips, one, and then back. You want to be thinking about, a good way to start this out is to actually think about turning your wrist and punching yourself in the gut here. Let's see. So from, right, so 1, 2, and now you're in a good position to be following through with a stab. Important note about how this stab is practiced is that your lead hand stays on the shaft of the spear, right? So this is a good framework generally if you like to throw pool cue shots like I do. This is a good habit to be in, is to leave your lead hand on the spear, except for when. Why might we see an exception to that? Yeah, so if my rear hand is going past where my front hand would be, that gives me extra range and I am sacrificing maneuverability for my spear. But if I don't need to access that extra range, then I should not be giving up the stability that I have for my lead hand, right? So that's why you see hands coming together on this kind of move. And then pulling back puts you right back in the position to do either of your other blocks from. I sort of alluded to this idea of lateral versus rotational moves. Let me get my volunteer Zell back up here again. So going into that in a little bit more depth. right? So when we've got these lateral moves, what do I mean by that? Your spear is just moving laterally, right? So for this kind of beat motion, which is good for the things that it does, but we want to have options. Right, so what this kind of rotational move does for us is that it gives us options to be thinking about strategically. And really, these are the three moves that my whole style of spear fighting is really based around, right? Like I think about all of my strategy in terms of these kinds of rotational moves. Right, so I guess at this point, I don't really need to be expanding on that too much more, right? So I'm rotating one way or rotating the other way, and either of these moves can lead into that stab, right? So the reason we see it is this inside lane rotation first and then the outside lane rotation is because I can do inside lane rotation and then the sort of half move of doing that outside lane rotation gets me into that position to be following through with the stab. If I'm on the opposite lane, then I can just do that outside lane rotation and go into the stab from there. The next thing along with that, so talking about rotational moves, is that we can also have a difference between larger circles and smaller circles, right? So I've been demonstrating these sort of smaller circle moves. We can also do setups for larger circles like so. One of the sort of strategic options that we get out of that sort of distinction is also coming into the amount of power that we're applying here, right? So if I do this and this sort of like very cheeky small rotation, then sometimes we get, the reason that I like to fish for that is because you can catch a position where your opponent doesn't necessarily realize that they're offline. Right? But we can also have larger rotations where I can fling that spear to the side, which makes a bigger opening, but you can also expect a bigger reaction from your opponent, right? Because if there's something big happening, you're gonna have that knee-jerk reaction of, I have to respond quickly. Questions?
How would you modify this technique? Like right now you have your head twist your stuff. You modify this in your crossed flow.
Oh, great question. So the movement is always the same. You're just entering from a different position, right? So the same kind of up and down moves, right? So something that I like to do if I've got an opponent with that front pointed guard out in front of me is I will sometimes enter with this kind of guard where I've got that, what is this one? I don't think this one's rooftop. But yeah, I guess this is like almost a fool's guard, right? I will enter this way because strategically I will use this position to fish for a way that I can enter that rotational position, the rotational move. Right? Otherwise, if I'm starting here, and this is something that you saw a lot of getting poked by me in the tournament yesterday, is I will do these like little moves where I'm kind of fishing for those small rotations this way. Right? So again, both of those are the same move mechanically, but I'm entering them from different positions. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, so now when your opponent steers down,
right?
How do you enter?
Oh yeah, go ahead. Again, the same way, right? So I can think about doing that fish down, fishing this way.
Hey, Sal, your phone's going out.
Oh, hold on.
Oops. And then sometimes you evaluate it and realize that it's not a position where it's going to be especially helpful, right? Because what I do from here, I might do this to get my opponent offline, just to get just to be in this position, but I'm not online by getting there, by doing that, right? I could try and motion all the way around that way. Sometimes that might be useful, but if I would do this, I think usually what I would be thinking about there is just to get it offline so that I can enter and choke up. We've got some different grip options. This, of course, does not wind up working very well with an ice pick grip. Not that anyone uses too much of that grip anyway. But whether you are in a pool cue grip or a motorcycle grip, both of those rotational moves are going to work mostly the same way. But with motorcycle grip, that is changing the dynamics of your stab, right? Because this is fine, winds up being a little funky. So motorcycle grip is mostly static hand position going for your double green shots. Whereas pool cue grip is going to be more of your pool cueing shots, sometimes sink some doubles with it, but motorcycle is better for doing doubles. When I'm shooting for a double, I will usually change over to motorcycle grip. Mostly that rotation is working the same way. You've got some slightly different dynamics in how your lead arm is moving. So there's a little bit more of that sort of elbow leading rather than wrist leading. Yes.
What are your thoughts on motorcycle grip with like extended steps?
The same as if you're doing forehand. I think that, like, in general, single-handed stabs are usually not worth the risk of throwing, as much as many of us are in the habit of doing that, myself included, right? Especially with these like very light, low pro spears. It is just unfortunately too easy to get into that habit, which is part of what I've been getting out of doing this drilling over and over, is trying to get myself back into the habit of keeping my lead hand on the spear. Yeah. Yeah, but if you are going for that shot, the dynamics of it are the same. Yeah. Question?
Yeah, maybe a kind of a foolish question, but I'll ask it anyway. In that type, with that type of mentality with the rotation, going into get your rotations to set up those double hand stats.
Yeah.
Regardless of what they're doing, how do you deal with the traditional like spear beat? Like, because I've always had issues when I'm using spear of like flinging up, or people will fling up spear, or they'll beat down real hard, or however it is.
Yeah, so
it might just be a skill issue, but I would ask.
Yeah, no, that's a good question. So one of the things is that you can think about bracing in that direction. So if Zell goes in for a beat here, right, so I can brace and hope that she's less successful than she hopes. That's not the best strategy. But from here, something that I can do, right? So thinking about what position is going to into what other position, right? Because that's the whole thing here, is that we are doing this to try and set up positions. So if Zell goes for that beat, what's she gonna follow with? She might stay there, but she'll probably follow it up with a shot. Is that whatever it is, I want to do something that is reacting defensively. So after that beat, when she goes in for the shot, I can retreat into that block, right? Because that's kind of the advantage of thinking this as blade binding, is that if I can be in this bind position, then we can continue that sort of back and forth manipulation, right? Which is why I am mostly trying to enter a bind when I am 1v1 spear fighting. Yeah. Different hand position grips. We can also have, it is really important for this to consider the width of your grip. That's going to substantially change the dynamics of what you're doing here, because hands further away has more leverage. However, your tip does not have as much mobility, right? So there's always a give and take with any differences in positioning, strategies, all of this, right? So considering what are our what are the advantages and disadvantages of each thing, right? So, and you also don't have length, right? Distance, which is why you're doing the pool cueing to get to change your hand position to get that distance, right? But that is why it is often good if you're fishing for this like I do, trying to enter so that you can get that rotational sort of spiral block. Then it is good to have the wider grip, because there is still some fight that's going on there, right? So if I have a narrow grip, my opponent has a wider grip, then even if I do my mechanics on this correctly, I'm still gonna have trouble. Right? So if I have a wider grip, then even if my opponent's fighting me, I can still use that hip leverage to gain advantage in that position, in that bind position. Right? As opposed to narrower grip, you've got a lot more sort of mobility to work with, right? So that is why usually the way that I'm thinking about this is that I've got a wider grip for a more defensive position, and my grip narrows when I want to be in an offensive position. In general, there are probably some exceptions to that. We already got into this a little bit from a couple of the questions, but let's really get down now into strategic options. How are we actually using these moves in a fight? Can I get you again, Zell? So we have the initial sort of obvious one is that we are close to each other here, and if I'm trying to enter, then I'm trying to get into this bind so that I can move my opponent's tip offline. In this case, where Zell is braced against me, I can also think about using this to move around her spear in other ways, right? So if I'm gonna do a disengage and just swap to the other and swap lanes, that's the same hip and arm movement. The body mechanics of that are the same. You're just not pressing into a spear anymore. Right? So I will sometimes sort of fish for that, get my opponent to try and brace back against me, disengage for that entry. Other times I will enter trying to get into a position where I can do that rotation, right? So this is often thinking of it the same way that you would think about a fake, where you are doing a move trying to set up whatever's coming after that move, right? So I'm usually trying, spear is the only weapon set where I am actually decent at thinking strategically. Right, so for most kinds of hits, I am thinking about how I am engaging in the fight in terms of how I am moving, right? How am I flowing from one shot into another shot? And how am I moving around my opponent? How is my opponent moving? Position is a part of that framework of motion, but it is not the primary thing in my brain. It is the opposite when I'm thinking about spear. Right, so if you've ever done boxing or heard people talk about boxing, they refer to it as being a game of positions, and I think about spear the same way. I am in a position, what other positions can I be in compared to the position that my opponent is in, right? So that is why I'm thinking about being online and offline, right? So an analysis of this position is that my spear is online and hers is offline. Right? What are the other positions that I can or would be useful for me to go in? If Zell returns with the same kind of spiral block, then I can think about responding with a disengage to be online, or I can think about moving into a more guarded position. Right, so trying to enter a position where I can use one of those rotation blocks. Sometimes I am getting that on aggression, right? So I'm trying to enter so that I can get into a bind, and I can rotate my opponent's spear position. Other times I will do that defensively, right? So especially like we talked about earlier, if I'm setting up this in this kind of semi-fool's guard stance, then I can be waiting for my opponent to come in and try and throw a stab at me. That puts me in this guard position, in this bind position, and then I can use that to return on my opponent. Questions? Yes.
When drilling this to practice the rotation skill set, what footwork would you pair with it?
Oh, I actually wouldn't. So I was about to get into drills. That was the next of my, no, it's great. I do actually enjoy when people preempt my topics in their questions, because that is such a great way to be engaging in the class. Right, so that's exactly the segue that I needed. So stepping is, you can go, as far as footwork is concerned, you can get into any position from any position, right? So your footwork really winds up coming in strategically when you're thinking about if you need to retreat or step forward into your opponent, or if you need to make sideways steps to change the angle of attack. Or if that winds up being useful defensively, right? So again, like that kind of guard. Yeah, right. It is more situational than I think is necessarily worth drilling. What I would recommend for drills, there are two things that I like to do. One of them, just to get the movement down, is to just go back and forth with the moves. Like so. And then we can swap lanes and do the other version. And one of the good things about doing a drill for this, as opposed to just practicing that solo move, is that you're getting the same kind of feedback that you should expect from a fight. And so that is going to force you into using better structure, right? So if I am just trying, if Zell braces against me and I'm trying to just power through with my arms, I can't move her doing this. I have to be engaging my hips. And so Zell is helping me figure out how to drive that motion from my hips. Yeah. And vice versa, right? So this is one of two drills to do. The other one is one that I picked up from watching a HEMA video. This was one that Cell Sword Arts made a video about a while ago that was like, oh, that's cool, and I'm gonna put that in my spear class. So it is, if you are familiar with the idea of having the strong and weak of a blade, this is what that's designed to be teaching for HEMA, right? So the strong of your blade, where you're going to be in a stronger position for leverage, versus the weak of the blade, where it's easier, where you have less leverage. But there is also the concept of having a strong and weak position that is similar to the concept of the strong and weak of a blade, because if we are pressed here, I am in a more strong position here than Zell is, right? I can manipulate that very easily with the more amount of leverage that I have, positionally between how we are holding our spears, and the way our spears are contacting each other. So the drill is that, let's take a step back here. Is that I am going to be in a strong position, and Zell is going to start in a weak position, and Zell is going to try and fish for a strong position, get herself into one, and once she is in there, she may take a step forward. And I am going to continue trying to stop her and putting her into a weak position. And so we can go back and forth. Once your partner has walked you down the line, you can return and walk them back down the line. And so I wasn't demonstrating anything with disengages on that, but you can also play with, once she's in a strong position, I don't have to just press back into her. I can disengage and move into a different position. Right, because the idea there is that we're wanting to get a little bit more of the practice with the dynamics of how these moves are going to be appearing in a fight. Questions? Yes?
Just like sticky hands being a good drill too?
Yeah, like that's kind of the concept, is it's pretty well based on sticking hands. Yeah, so what she's talking about, let's go ahead and demonstrate that, is that in Tai Chi especially, and some other martial arts, Chinese martial arts, you've got these sort of sticky hand drills, which is this push-pull. I think there are probably interesting ways that you can adapt this into drills here, but I am unable to think of anything other than the basic back and forth.
So it's kind of just like, is that also like
I'm not going to get into that one. That was just for context for her question. Yeah. Do we have other questions? All right. I hope everyone has found this useful. That's it.